Welcome to another episode of Den Talks. Today I am going to give you an overview on diabetes mellitus and dental consideration in patients coming to your clinic with a history of diabetes mellitus. As you all know, diabetes mellitus is a disease where there is an abnormal or increased level of blood glucose which is not under control, and it has got widespread inflictions on the various systems of the body and affecting the health of an individual. It's been classified into different varieties, different types by the WHO in 2019, where they classified it into type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, hybrid form of diabetes, specific form of diabetes or other sources, then diabetes related to pregnancy, and unclassified diabetes. Of these different types, what we will be concerned is more about type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is seen in 5 to 10% of the total individuals suffering from diabetes. It is actually connected or mediated through a cell destruction or autoimmune disorder where the body's own cells, the CD4 and CD8 cells, identifies the pancreas and destroys them, and there is no secretion of insulin. So type 1 diabetes is also called as insulin dependent or juvenile diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is the most commonly seen one. In 90 to 95% of the patient with diabetes, it is a type 2 form. Here the most relevant portion is the resistance of the cells to insulin. Even though there is secretion of insulin, the cells are resistant to the effect of insulin, so there is no control of the blood glucose. In this situation, in certain individuals with type 2 diabetes, there is also a reduction in the insulin secretion. This type 2 diabetes is called insulin non-dependent diabetes or adult diabetes. So these are the two forms which I will be talking specifically about. I won't be going into details of the other type of diabetes. Let us see how is the blood sugar level control or the regulation of blood glucose in the body. There are two important hormones which comes into picture as far as regulation of the hormones is concerned. One, insulin, and the one is glucagon. The sources of glucose which comes from intestinal absorption, then it also comes from glycogenolysis, that is breakdown of the storage of glucose in the form of glycogen from the liver and muscles. Gluconeogenesis, synthesizing glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. These are the three sources by which the glucose is reached in the blood circulation for the utilization of the cells. Now, whenever there is an increase in this level of blood glucose, there is release of insulin from the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans. Insulin lowers the blood sugar level. How? Let's see. It increases the peripheral utilization of the glucose, thereby reducing the total level in the blood. It also facilitates and promotes the storage of glucose in the form of glycogen in liver and other muscle cells, thereby again reducing the level of the circulating blood glucose. It also inhibits the gluconeogenesis. The formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate source also inhibited by this insulin. So overall, it brings about a hypoglycemic level or reduction of the increased blood sugar level. Now let's see how glucagon works. Whenever there is a lower blood sugar level, the glucagon is released from the alpha cells of pancreas. How does that bring up the blood glucose level? It decreases the peripheral utilization of the cells, thereby increasing the level in the blood. It actually brings about breaking down of glucose from glycogen, that is glycogenolysis. It also promotes gluconeogenesis. By these three mechanisms, the glucagon brings higher levels of glucose into the blood. That is how in hypoglycemic conditions glucagon comes into picture, and hyperglycemic conditions insulin comes into picture. Now let's see what are the cardinal signs of diabetes. You might have heard about polyuria, polyphagia and polydipsia. What is polyuria and why is it happening? Whenever there is a high levels of blood sugar, and when this blood sugar exceeds 180 milligrams per deciliter, that means the renal threshold is exceeded. The blood glucose is excreted from the kidney rather than reabsorption. When the blood glucose is excreted through the kidney, the osmotic concentration of the urine changes. Thereby, it carries a lot of water also along with the glucose in the urine. So there is excess of release of water and glucose in the urine, which was otherwise reabsorbed in normal individuals. So in abnormal individuals where the levels are high, there is a severe excretion of the water along with glucose. So that's the reason for polyuria. Polydipsia, increased thirst. Why and why it happens? When this excess amount of urine is passed always, the fluid content mostly comes from the intravascular compartment or the body fluids or the blood volume. So there is a reduction in the blood volume when there is so much of polyuria, and this reduction in blood volume leads to compensatory mechanisms. All the cells in the body try to compensate this particular blood loss by removing or transferring the intracellular fluid to the intravascular compartment. So this shift of intracellular fluid to the intravascular compartment makes the cells dehydrated. And the sense of dehydration is what you feel, the feeling of thirst or polydipsia. And let's see what's polyphagia. In these individuals, even though there is very high levels of blood glucose in the body, the cells are unable to utilize because of the lack of insulin. Insulin's presence is mandatory and requirement for the cells to utilize the blood glucose. So even though there is a high level of blood glucose in the body, the cells are unable to use the glucose for energy. But the cells need energy and are craving for glucose. So that's available from the diet. So that hunger comes. That is called polyphagia. So these are the three terms: polyuria, polyphagia, and polydipsia. I hope the terms are understood for you. Well, let's see what are the complications associated with this uncontrolled diabetes. It's got implication on almost all the systems. The most important factor, what you see as a complication in diabetes, is microangiopathy. What happens? How it happens? Whenever there is high concentration of blood glucose level, the vascular endothelial cells or the subendothelial cells has got a severe affinity for glucose. This glucose goes and sediments in the subendothelial level or in the endothelial cells in the basement membrane. And they are reluctant or resistant to insulin use also. So there is always a high concentration of glucose settled in the basement membrane endothelial cells. Over a period of time, they start leaking proteins and they start proliferating, and slowly small amount of plaque formation happens on the innermost part of the lining of the blood vessel. The innermost lining, what I am talking about is the tunica intima, the innermost core. So there is a small plaque formation which gets increased day by day as the disease progresses, and that is the reason for increased episodes or increased incidence of atherosclerotic plaque in diabetes individuals. For this reason, what happened? There is a reduction in the lumen of the vessel. Microangiopathy. That's what it happens there. On top of this, in uncontrolled diabetic patients, the vessel wall, the outermost vessel wall, which we call it as the tunica adventitia, is less resilient when compared to normal individuals. So when a large volume of blood is pumped inside, the normal individual's vessels, pulsate, and resilient nature accommodates this volume of the blood. In diabetic patients, because of the tunica intima lining with this atherosclerotic plaque and a reduction in the lumen, and the outer layer being more or less resilient, there is more resistance offered to the blood which is flown through it. So when in diabetic patients, because of the microangiopathy and the difference in the nature of the tunica adventitia, hypertension is also commonly seen. So atherosclerotic plaque, which makes the patients more prone for CAD or coronary artery diseases or cardiovascular diseases. Atherosclerotic plaque and the reduced lumen size again making the patient more prone for hypertension. When this microangiopathy involves the retina is the supply, the main supply is coming from the central artery of retina. It's a supply, it's a branch of the ophthalmic artery, a branch of the internal carotid artery. When these vessels are involved, there is a reduction in the nutrient supply to the retina, which suffers, the cell suffers, the rods and cones of the retina suffers from this microangiopathy, and on a long run, it affects the eye and leading to diabetic retinopathy, we call it. When this particular microangiopathy involves the kidney, we call it diabetic nephropathy. When this microangiopathy involves the vessels or the nerves, wherein which the microvasculature supply to the nerves also suffers this microangiopathy, and there is a inconsistent or a reduced supply to the nerves, which makes them reduced or impaired conduction of impulse, propagation of impulse, interpretation and perception, everything is changed. That's why you get this peripheral neuropathy. When it involves the brain, the cerebral vessels, it undergoes infarction, or with hypertension it can even develop stroke, cerebrovascular accidents. When it involves the heart, you can create coronary artery attacks or the myocardial infarction and the related complications. One more thing I would like to say as a complication diabetic patient is ketoacidosis. You might have heard about this term ketoacidosis, and what happens? Every cell requires energy. Every cell needs glucose for the energy. In diabetic patients, because of the lack of insulin, even though the high levels of glucose is present, the cells can't utilize the glucose for their energy. So they have to depend upon other sources for energy. Where do they depend? They depend on the fat, or there's other sources which is being broken down. There's the breaking down of the fat, the breakdown product of which is ketones or ketone bodies. So these ketone bodies are excellent fuels. These ketones are used as fuel by the cells for their energy, and that actually increases the acidity or reduces the pH. That is what happens when there is a metabolic acidosis. The end result is a metabolic acidosis, or what we call it as ketoacidosis. Extremely acidic situations are very unfavorable and detrimental to all the vital organs. This slowly affects all the organs, including the kidneys, the brain, and related disorders will happen, and finally patient will go into coma and death. So that is diabetic ketoacidosis. Now let's talk a brief about the management. The overall management of diabetes depends upon the reason or the type of etiology, whether it's type 1 or type 2. But in general, the management part is usually comprising of lifestyle changes, in which dietary control or uptake, then regular exercises and other sort of maneuvers. These are the lifestyle modifications or changes what is being prescribed by the physicians. Then of course medications, medical therapy. Medical therapy in type 1 type of diabetes, since there is an absolute shortage of insulin therapy is the mandatory requirement. Insulin in various forms or different types. In type 2, oral hypoglycemic agents are used. Various agents include sulfonylureas, biguanides, then you have thiazides, and different other chemical structures that are being used in the market, ranging from different types of product, metformin, glibenclamide, glyphosate. They usually start off with a single dose therapy or a single drug therapy. And based on the HbA1c and other values, they decide if the medication is under control, they'll continue with that. If it's not under control, if the HbA1c is still increasing, they'll go on to dual drug therapy. In dual drug therapy, they'll again watch and monitor the patient for 2 or 3 months. If the HbA1c is not yet controlled, they go for a triple drug therapy. If that's also not controlled, then they go for an addition of insulin also. Now that we have known about the classification, the various risk factors, the cardinal signs, the complications, the regulation of blood sugar, and also management part, let us move on to our main thing. The dental considerations in patients with this. What are the problems what dental surgeons face, or what we can face, what we should consider when a patient with diabetes comes to a clinic? Number 1, they will be having a defective immune mechanism or immune system. Why? High levels of diabetes, or in terms of uncontrolled diabetic patients, the WBCs becomes defective. As you all know, the WBCs are the principal or the first line of defense in sort of any infection or any sort of other inflammation. Whatever is said and done, leukocytes play the primary part in the control of this. So they are the first line defense. So when there is a defective function of the WBCs, that affects the immunity. The first line defense, when an antigen comes, become weak. So that's why you have a lower immunity. Reduce wound healing and repair. Again, now inflammation, healing and repair all goes hands in hand, isn't it? So the primary inflammatory cells are your leukocytes, the polymorphonuclear cells. Then in chronic inflammation, your lymphocytes come, and then later on, as part of the phagocytosis, the monocytes transfer into your macrophages and eats up all the leftover things, and phagocytosis comes and repair phases come. Now that sequence is altered in diabetic individuals because the leukocytes are itself less functional. The stages of inflammation, as you all remember, the early stages, first is the margination, wherein which the laminar flowing blood vessel cells, the WBC is in response to antigen, moves from the laminar flow and comes to the lumen or the periphery of the blood vessel. That's called margination or pavementing. Then they move across the cell wall by, there's an increased vascular permeability also as a response to inflammation. So they move across the cell membrane, what we call it as diapedesis. Then they marginate and go towards the site of the inflammation or a wound or whatever it is, and they do their functions of attacking the antigens and killing them and whatever it is. And then the leftovers are removed by these macrophages which is forming from the monocytes, and phagocytosis happen. That's how the normal things are. Now, all these steps are delayed in diabetic patients. Okay, that is the reason for a reduced healing. And on top of that, the final phase of healing is actually a laying down of matured collagen. So in diabetic patients, the collagen form is totally immature. And there is more of collagen destruction than formation, but we call it as collagen or fibroblastic apoptosis. There is a lot of destruction. So quality collagen is not formed, again making the wound healed actually less stable. And decreased WBC activity actually reducing the chemotactic property and all those steps involved in inflammation and a delayed wound healing. On top of that, the microangiopathy again restricts the flow of blood to that, so delayed reaching of these cells. So these are the reasons for reduced healing and repair. They are more prone for infections. Why? I told you earlier, they have a defective immune mechanism. So they have their frontline barriers weak. So naturally, a simple microorganism with a normal virulence will be dominating over the body. So that is the reason they are more prone for infections. They are more prone for hypoglycemic related syncope. Why? Patients who are under medication for diabetes might be taking insulin, might be taking OHA, whatever it is. The syncope can happen due to 2 reasons. One, they might have taken an increased dose of insulin, but they may not be having that much of food in the stomach to compensate. So the resultant action of insulin predominates, hypoglycemia will result and the syncope. Second, they would be having a regular medication of anti-hypoglycemic agents, but they may have to skip the meal, again leading to a hypoglycemia related. So that's again hypoglycemia related syncope. Drug interactions is again another one problem that we should consider. Patients with uncontrolled diabetes and on oral hypoglycemic agents, very vulnerable to the use of salicylates, people on salicylates or aspirin and things like that, and people who are on, when you put the patient on benzodiazepines or anti-anxiety drugs, anxiolytic drugs, they are seen to be potentiating the effects of these oral hypoglycemic agents. So what happens? They might actually create a abnormal hypoglycemia when used concurrently with it. Then other problem would be the risk associated with other disorders, because in diabetic patients most of them would be having a hypertension and a cardiac problem also. So problems related to these 2 conditions also have to be kept in mind, not just diabetes alone. And of course the rare possibility of ketoacidosis. These are the problems what we face. I'll just repeat once again: reduced immunity, delayed wound healing, more prone for infections, microangiopathy related problems. Then they'll have this chances of hypoglycemic syncope. They also have this rare chance of diabetic ketoacidosis. They also have problems associated with the other disorders like hypertension and cardiovascular diseases. Then one more thing what I forgot is LA with adrenaline when we use should be careful, because the adrenaline has got a hyperglycemic effect. Okay, the hyperglycemic effect of adrenaline is by virtue of gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, and also it decreases the peripheral utilization of glucose by the cell. So these 3 properties makes adrenaline a hyperglycemic agent. So when you're giving loperamide with adrenaline, you have to take care that intravascular administration is not given. So that is something what you have to be careful about. Now you know the problem. Now let's see what are the investigations. As far as diabetic patients, 3 or 4 important parameters has to be checked. First is the fasting blood sugar level. When I talk about fasting blood sugar level, the ideal time of fasting is 8 hours. 8 hours fasting is the ideal value. So fasting blood sugar level should not exceed 126 milligrams per deciliter. Fasting blood sugar level value of 126 milligrams per deciliter is considered as a cutoff value to decide a patient is diabetes or not. Any value above 126 milligrams per cent is considered to be diabetes as per the WHO as well as the American Diabetic Association. Any value from the number 100 to 126 milligrams per deciliter is considered as pre-diabetic stage. They have an increased propensity, or they are more prone to become proper diabetics in the future, but they do not have any problem with us in management. I'm just telling you the pre-diabetic stage and a diabetic stage. As far as postprandial blood sugar level or your random blood sugar level, the cutoff value what the WHO says is 200 milligrams per deciliter. So these are 3 main values, and one more important thing is what you have to check about is the glycemic status over the past 3 months, which is very well reflected by the HbA1c value. It's nothing but the glycated hemoglobin. The glucose which is absorbed by the cells, okay, is in the form of a glycated hemoglobin in the RBCs. So that will be there in the RBCs for the lifespan of the RBCs. The usual lifespan of RBCs is about 90 to 120 days. So if you examine the patient's RBCs or the glycated hemoglobin, that gives you the amount of the glucose which is still retained in the RBCs in the glycated form. So that HbA1c value is what they assess and they tell. So that gives a control of the patient about the diabetic situation. An HbA1c value, ideal value is 6.4. But in diabetic patients, up to 7 can be considered to be within normal limits. So that's the values which I have told you about fasting blood sugar level, postprandial, and HbA1c value, and random blood sugar also. Now that you know the values, let us move on to the management of patients. First thing, make sure that the blood sugar levels are checked and the values are within the normal ranges like I have told you earlier. Preferably give the morning appointments because these people also will be having associated disorders like hypertension and cardiovascular disorders. So they are very prone for stress-related problems. Stress is the best, met with by the body in morning appointments because cortisol is one important, again, hormone synthesized and given off by the adrenal cortex, which means the stress of the person. Cortisol is maximum seen in the early hours, morning till about 11 to 12 time. So that again has got an indigenous stress, shielding effect by this particular cortisol. And mainly patients would have taken the breakfast in the morning, so they would be an adequate food in the stomach also. So hypoglycemia related syncope is also chances there. Due to these reasons, preferably give morning appointments. Stress reduction protocol has to be adopted because you have to make the patient comfortable and make the patient feel that there is no problem, and as much as problem or stress related problems has to be given under control. Something like use of OD analgesia and other pharmacological methods of using this particular anti-anxiety drugs. Anti-anxiety drugs, when you use, you should remember, if your patient is on sulfonylurea, there is a potential chance of increased hypoglycemia. Just keep in mind. That's about the stress protocol. Then atraumatic techniques. Be kind to the tissues, be gentle to the tissues as much as possible, reduce amount of trauma. Place sutures wherever possible. Even if it's a mobile tool, try to place sutures so that you approximate the wound and helping in the body to repair, because you know that these particular patients have got a deficient healing or a delayed healing mechanism. Now, antibiotics to use or not to use. There's a little of controversy in that. I'll just tell you. Any diabetic patient who has the controlled values, even if its patient is non-diabetic and medication, but if the values are within normal limits, like what I've told you in the list, do not require a prophylactic antibiotic. They have their own systems to heal properly, so they do not have the typical complication what we expect in diabetes. But any patient whose value is above this particular diabetic values what I've told in the figure before, in the investigation values, it's preferably better to do any surgical procedure. And what I'm talking about is any dental procedure. When I talk about any trauma inducing, any wound inflicting procedures, it's always better to do under antibiotic cover if the values are above the same. And physician's consent is must in these patients if it's not value is not controlled, and because they are a better person to decide to adjust the medication or not. Okay, that's in brief about managing the patient. So basically, make sure the values are within normal limits. Give morning appointments preferably. Make sure the patient has taken the food properly. Make sure the patient has not taken additional dose of antihypertensive agents. And make sure you adopt stress reduction protocols, atraumatic procedures as much as possible, sutures has to be placed as much as possible to reduce an approximate wound, and LA with adrenaline should use with caution, because make sure you frequently aspirate, make sure you don't inject intravascularly, okay, and proper instructions for proper wound care has to be given. Antibiotic, I've told you when to give, how to give. That's about the management part of things. Now let's see what is the complication in this particular situation you can have. You can have a hypoglycemia-induced complication, a hypoglycemia-induced syncope. That's one complication what you can expect in diabetic patients. How does this happen? I told you, patient would have the reason. Either the insulin dose would have been doubled or more than the required. Patient would have taken that and not adequate food in the stomach, or the normal medication have taken but not taken food. Due to these two reasons, you can get hypoglycemia-related syncope on the chair. How do you identify? The signs and symptoms are similar to your routine syncopal attacks, a little bit of a tremor, a little bit of sweating on the temple region, the forehead region, then pallor on the lips, a little bit of disorientation, gastric upset, patient might complain about. The peripheries will be appearing here, cool to touch. Now pulse will be weak and steady. These are the things what you are early signs. So in a diabetic patient, if you notice these signs, first thing, make the patient supine. Okay, making the patient supine will actually increase the blood flow to the brain, but that doesn't replace the hypoglycemia. So for that, what you have to do? So in an awake and alert patient, you can give oral glucose. 15 grams of glucose is what is recommended in a drink. 15 grams means your regular glucose powder, 3 teaspoons. 1 teaspoon will contain about 5 milligrams of glucose powder. So 3 teaspoons will make it 15 grams. So 15 grams of glucose powder, give to the patient either indirectly or in the form of solution you can give, or any high sweetie drinks like juices or fruity or whatever it is. So that actually should be given, and wait for 20 minutes. The reflection will be in 20 minutes. You will find the blood sugar level rising in 20 minutes time. Ideally, the science or studies say 1 gram of glucose powder will raise the blood glucose value 3 to 4 milligrams per deciliter in 20 minutes after administration. That's what the science says. So you expect about, after giving this 15 grams, you expect about a good rise in the blood glucose level. How would you do that? It's advisable to have a glucometer with you. You can just check the patient sample then and there. Okay, that is one way of assessing. The other way of assessing is the signs of the hypoglycemia related syncope improving, pulse improving, patient feeling better, all the signs are coming back to normal. That's the way you assess. If the patient is not responding after the first thing, you can give one more drink of glucose. If the patient is still not responding or the patient is basically uncooperative, then you have to go for injections. Now what injections? In the emergency drug kit, there's a injection called as Glucagon. So this Glucagon injection can be given subcutaneous or intramuscular or even IV. Okay, that will really increase the blood glucose level and save you from the hypoglycemia. It's simple to give a subcutaneous injection just underneath the skin wheel, a 2 millimeter in a 45-degree manner for a subcutaneous injection underneath the skin. Prepare it and then aspirate, make sure, and then inject. Intramuscular again, IV again. You can also palpate someone hold your upper part of the arm, then prepare this with the surface disinfectant and tap, and you will find the vein, the cubital vein, the medial cubital vein or the regular vein seen here at the superficial surface. Take a simple needle, a 25 gauge or whatever needle, and that's just inject into the vein. At 2 millimeters underneath the skin, you will find the vein. The moment the needle enters the vein, you will find the red flash on the needle tip. So aspirate, inject. That's the IV. That's about you are injecting glucagon injection. If the patient is unconscious and not responsive, you should actually shift the patient as early as possible. You should actually activate emergency medical services. Then you can even infuse. If you have a trained nurse, you can give an infusion of 50% dextrose, 25 to 50 ml can be infused over a period of time. And then other regulatory measures, vital signs has to be monitored, the BP pulse has to be monitored regularly, the progress has to be monitored, and then assessed. If there is no change, immediately shift the patient to the hospital or wherever nearest facilities available. So that's in brief about managing a patient who have had a hypoglycemia-induced attack in your chair. So that's in brief about diabetes mellitus, the various factors connecting with that, the dental considerations, management of patients with diabetes, when to extract, when not to extract, when to give antibiotic, when not to give antibiotic, and hypoglycemia-related syncope also has been discussed. Thank you for your patient listening. Hope you like this video. Thank you.